Well, good morning, everybody. And I'm saying good morning, but I might as well say good afternoon, good evening, good very late in the middle of the night. We're very much aware of the exceptional time of day that this live event goes out. Not something that people who are going to rewatch later on will have to deal with, but we expect that most of our US followers will be watching on catch up, although I've seen some people who say it's 3 a.m. So that's just to say, and also my voice, you can tell it's earlier than usual. My name is Janneke van der Weijden, and I'm very fortunate to host this session of the Ann Lister Research Summit. As many of you here today, I was bitten by the Ann Lister bug following Sally Wainwright's Gentleman Jack. And with the encouragement of Ann Schoma, I became aware of Anne's travel notes of her tour of the Netherlands in August 1831. And that was a great way for me to start into transcribing. And since I've visited many places in my native Netherlands, following in Anne and Marianne's adventures, however, my dabbling falls quite short in comparison to the art form that these three people have made of it. On behalf of myself and the three presenters, who I will introduce to you shortly, I would like to thank the ALRS squad behind the event for the hard work that they've done once more this third year in a row in order to bring such diverse and interesting topics to our attention. I know that I'm not the only one who had this event penciled and then inked over in their calendars since it was announced. Now, you're all admirers of Anne, and you all know that one of her favorite pastimes was traveling. So today we're talking about following in Anne's footsteps. We have, oh, apologize, this is what I was expecting this morning. Right, my script has just gone back all the way to the bottom. Bear with me 1 second. So we have these wonderful panelists, and they're going to share some of their experiences. But I would just like to pay a little tribute to some of the women who went there before. For example, Helena Whitbread, she initially started traveling around Yorkshire in the early 1980s. And she traveled to Paris with Anne Schoma in the early 90s to find all the locations where Anne had lived in the French capital. And then there's my fellow Dutchie, Joke Weenink, who I had the pleasure of meeting recently. And she told me all about her following Anne's trail through Scotland in 4 summers between the years of 2011 and 2018. And she showed her true Dutch colours by brazenly walking up to the front door at Langton Hall and ringing that bell when it was still a school in the early noughties. And these are just a few of the amazing women who caught the AL footsteps bug early on. So suffice to say that with many subjects related to Anne Lister, we are all treading in the footsteps of great women before us. And I, together with the whole panel, hope that you, our audience, will benefit from some of the experts' advice and will catch this bug too. So the next time you find yourself planning a trip away in Europe, or maybe you even want to travel to Iran via Russia, you make sure to check if Anne ever went there. And if so, you take her words with you as your travel guide and companion. Okay, and I really must stop doing this because I did the same trick again, mixing up my slides. So here is a quote from a letter or draft to a letter to Isabella MacLean. Thus, I am fond of traveling. Now, here's what you can expect of this session. After my introduction, shortly, the panelists will each present their own stories of what they have been up to. And after the presentations, there will be time for Q&A. So, and we've asked before, and it's with these sessions, please could you leave your questions in the chat, and we will then address them later on. Now let me introduce our wonderful three. Lucia Falzari lives in Italy and is a founding member of Ann Lister Italia, a project born in 2020 as a website to introduce Ann Lister to the Italian audience, and it soon transformed into a research project when Francesca Araya and Irene Trotta joined her. And I'd like to point to the session almost at the end of this weekend for Ann Lister Italia going to Italy, which will also be very interesting. Lucia's personal travel experience in the footsteps of Anne Lister focuses on Anne's 1827 journey to Italy, but it also extends to Copenhagen and the Netherlands. Adeline Lim, author of volumes 1 and 2 of In the Footsteps of Anne Lister. Since 2019, she has traveled to more than 200 Anne Lister destinations across the UK and the European continent, chasing after Anne, crisscrossing from London to Bath, through North Wales, Ghent to Cologne, Strasbourg to Milan, Venice to Lausanne, Dinan to Lucerne, and so much more. Her first travel map, Unpacked with Potential, was a collaboration between myself and her in February 2020, which detailed that travel Anne and Marianne in the Netherlands in 1831. But to date, Adeline has created about 17 story maps of Anne's travels, either independently or in collaboration with other transcriber or travel enthusiasts. Adeline lives in Sydney, hence our odd time slot right now, in Australia, and returns to Europe as often as she can. Now, Susanne Piotrowski lives in Germany, and she's one of the code breakers. Her first batch for the transcription project was about Anne Lister in Paris, and this started her interest in this part of Anne's life. It evolved into 1 year of transcription, several visits to, and endless kilometers of walking through Paris. She would like to one day write a book about her experiences. Triggered by the travel maps Unpacked with Potential, she collaborated with me on Anne and Marianne in Wales and Ireland, and the tour from Copenhagen back to England, and Anne's visit to Aachen. She also started researching the history of towns in Germany, such as her own town of birth, Bremen, and nearby Aachen. The travels in Aachen resulted in a travel map and a wonderful live tour with other nerds. So with introductions over, I would now like to hand over to Adeline.
Thanks, Janneke. Really lovely to see you again and be invited to a panel of such great people. We all find Anne Lister through our own ways. For me, it was a chance encounter with an article published on BBC Online. It happened at a time when my dog Ziggy's health was failing. A couple of months later, Ziggy passed, and I found that I needed something to keep me going, to give me a reason to get up and do things. Anne's travels fascinated me, and I devoured all the books I could get my hands on in search of more information. Within a few days of Ziggy's death, I had mapped a route that would take me in Anne Lister's footsteps from Trier in southwestern Germany to Copenhagen. Then traveling through Denmark, I traced her steps from Copenhagen to Odense, Middelfart, Kolding, and all the way back into Germany to finish at Cuxhaven. My first book resulted from this itinerary. Published in 2021, In the Footsteps of Anne Lister, Volume 1 covers a 6-month period of Anne's life. From her departure in June 1833 from Shipton Hall, her travels through France, Luxembourg, Germany, Denmark, until her return to Shipton in December. To say that Anne's travels became an obsession to me is a bit of an understatement. 2 years on, I had transcribed about 1,500 pages of her travel journal and diary, and had visited nearly 200 destinations in her honor. These markers here show only the places that I had visited specifically for Anne. Though I have traveled extensively in Sweden, Norway, France, and Ireland, I have not marked those destinations on this map. So these truly are specifically just Anne Lister destinations. From my whirlwind travels, Volume 2 of In the Footsteps of Anne Lister was published a year later. Volume 2 covers Anne's travels in 1827 and 1829. The travels contained within this volume is very special to me. Anne's 1827 journals were actually my first transcription attempt, and it was Janneke who introduced me to transcribe. We had worked together on the 1831 story map of the Netherlands and became friendly through that. At the time, around April 2020, I think, the travel journals were yet to be transcribed, and I was very curious about her travels with Mrs. Maria Barlow. Janneke and I had quite a few laughs about my terrible attempts at transcribing, especially when I misread Anne's abbreviated word for churches as chickens. Reading Anne's diaries or travel journals firsthand is indescribable. Don't let Anne's handwriting deter you. There's a Facebook group dedicated to code breakers, and they are all very friendly and helpful. Reach out and find a mentor. You'll be amazed how supportive the code breakers are. From the 2 large chickens faux pas in April 2020, I progressed to receive my codebreaker certificate from the West Yorkshire Archive Service in May 2022 and published 2 books using my own transcriptions. I encourage you to be part of this amazing community of transcribers. Yes, the diaries and travel journals have now been fully transcribed, but believe me, reading Anne's words firsthand is a very rewarding endeavor. Today with you, I'd like to focus on a small selection of bridges and mountains I've encountered as I followed in Anne's footsteps. One day, perhaps I'll showcase her cathedrals, but the truth is she compares the cathedrals throughout Europe and Britain to York Minster, and they generally come up short. So this is Thomas Telford's Menai Suspension Bridge in North Wales. It spans the Menai Strait connecting the mainland of Wales and the island of Anglesey. It was constructed between 1818 and 1826. When Anne visited in 1822, it was not yet completed, but already she could see that it would be something spectacular. The germ of the finest thing I ever saw, as she wrote in her diary of 19 July 1822. In 1829, she returned and remarked, "Telford's Bridge, magnificent, wonderful, all delighted with it. Thought it worth going 500 miles to see." Now, there are many viewpoints to admire this bridge, and I highly recommend viewing it from the western side of the bridge along Beach Road. In 1830, when Anne visited the Pont du Gard in south of France, she confided in her diary, "How much finer is Telford's Bridge over the Menai?" She didn't know why, but felt a singular sense of disappointment. She did concede in the end that the Pont du Gard was magnificent. Personally, I find it difficult to compare a marvel of engineering built in the first AD to the relatively modern structure of Thomas Telford's 19th century bridge. Lucia Falzari, the founder of Anne Lister Italia, and I met up in Verona after more than a year of e-friendship. We started corresponding online when I created the Venice story map for her, and our friendship went from strength to strength. Lucia was also particularly useful in translating my Italian speeding tickets and whatever penalties I received for driving into a protected exclusion zone in the old towns of Italy. We finally met in Verona in the summer of 2021, when Verona was baking in about 35 degrees Celsius and humidity hovered around the 90% mark. Even then, we spent nearly 13 sweaty hours together, visiting every landmark, monument, church, and bridge that Anne wrote of in her travel journal. If you've read volume 2, you'll see that I wrote a glowing acknowledgement of Lucia in the back pages, and she deserves every word printed in those paragraphs. This bridge that you see now, which Anne said was always locked up, is definitely not locked up anymore. It's a wonderful place to stroll on a balmy evening and watch the sunset over the horizon. The Adige flows languidly under it, and the effect is really rather magical. In the evenings, the bridge is lit. It is particularly atmospheric when low fluffy clouds linger above it and catches the diaspora of lights. It was Isabella Norcliffe who told Anne Lister of the Devil's Bridge, Teufelsbrücke in German. The Norcliffes traveled extensively, and Anne received quite a few tips about where to go and where to stay from them. This version that we see is a tamer version of what Anne would have seen. However, the photo I took does not really do the bridge justice. The uncompromising rock cliffs that tower over this bridge in the Schollenen Gorge is really quite spectacular and formidable. You have to stand there at the bridge's great height, feel the cold wind that is channeled through this gorge, hear the torrent of the Royce as its waters rush and hurtle over the rocks, to really understand that for someone like Isabella Norcliffe, this could, in fact, be quite a daunting scene. Anne Lister and Anne Walker visited the Cirque de Gavany in 1838. The day before, they had climbed the Pic du Pimnay and had admired the views that looked onto the Cirque. Nowadays, it's really easy for us to visit this site. The walk from Gavany takes about 2 hours, and you may even rent ponies or donkeys from an association opposite Le Terron. You walk along the road called Le Village and follow the River Gave de Gavany on a broadish, unpaved path, past a little bar called, believe it or not, La Chaumière, to the Hotel de Cirque de Gavany, where you'll have to leave your pack animals. From there, the path becomes a rocky, narrowish trail, and the walk is significantly prettier because it becomes wilder until it opens up into a vast amphitheater that is the Cirque de Gavany. The cascade is very impressive, and you can see it from quite a distance. You can also walk right up to it, but its spray is significant, so get ready to get a bit wet. Anne herself had written in her diary, the Cirque and cascade, very fine. This cascade is said to be the tallest in France at 422 meters in cumulative height. In 1834, as a lot of you would be aware, the Annes went on their honeymoon to France. They also visited Switzerland and ducked into Italy briefly, getting as far as Aosta. On their way back to Paris, they stopped in Clermont in central France, where Anne bought some brochures and a sort of guidebook to the Puy de Dôme. The area around Clermont-Ferrand is well known for its chain of volcanic mountains, and Anne decided to summit the Puy. The Puy de Dôme is very special to me. I cajoled, groveled, and basically forced poor Chris to agree to a 980-kilometer detour, just so I could ascend this mountain and beat Anne's time of 1 hour and 2 minutes. We ascended in extremely dismal weather. The entire mountain was shrouded in fog, and it rained the entire time as we hiked up. When we got to the end of the Mules Trail, just under the summit in 36 minutes, the same path that Anne took, but of course, much improved and better maintained now, we could not see anything but cloud. It took us a while to actually figure out where the summit was because visibility was so bad. But we finally found the right path and got to the summit proper about 10 minutes later. The photo you see here was actually taken after we descended and were driving off. Because the weather was so dismal and the views basically non-existent when we went up in the morning, I ascended again in the afternoon. This time, the views that Anne admired unfolded before me, and it definitely made it all worthwhile. I should mention that on the second ascent, I went on the panoramic train, which is also a good option for those who might prefer a less strenuous way up. For those who want to suffer like I did, you can set your GPS to park at the parking called the César, near the Auberge de Gros Manot, and follow the trail marked Chemin de Muleteers up. It's really steep, but the path is well maintained, and you should be able to get to the summit in an hour, even with stops to take photos. Saving the best for last, this was one adventure which really made me respect Anne's intrepid character. She was traveling with Maria Barlow at the time, but she attempted these ladders on her own. The ladders are part of an ancient ladder route between the villages of Albinen and Leukerbad in Switzerland's canton of Valais. It is believed that they were established around AD 800 by the Germanic Alemanni, who were looking for a shortcut to allow faster access from the mountains of Gemmi to the Kanda and Rhone valleys. Of course, the ladders today are not the same ones. Being made of wood, they do get replaced regularly. And I'm sure the ladders today are a lot sturdier than what Anne climbed. There were 8 of them, with 1 or 2 having perhaps 6 steps, the longest ladder not more than 12 or 14 steps. But Anne was too busy climbing to really count them, and I too was very much distracted with the height and view and the fact that one stupid move could easily cost me my life. So my phone was securely zipped in my pocket, and all my focus was about holding on and looking at where I was putting my feet. The precipice is exactly as Anne described it, tremendous and perpendicular. It really was an abyss. Anne wrote quite comprehensively of her experience at these ladders. The Packed with Potential website has a great article on Anne's mountaineering endeavors under their Stories tab. So if you're interested in Anne's mountaineering adventures, that should be your starting point. Marlene and Amanda have done a great job putting those articles together. That's all from me today. I leave you with this photo of Lac de Gaupe that Anne visited with Lady Stuart in 1831. In the background is Vignemale, the same summit Anne conquered in 1838. Thanks for being with me on this journey. I'm now going to hand the reins over to Lucia Falzari, who will take you through her experience of following in Anne's footsteps. Lucia brings a different and very endearing perspective of Anne's travels. To paraphrase Marcel Proust, the only true voyage of discovery is not to visit strange lands, but to possess other eyes, which is to behold the universe through the eyes of another. So with that, over to you, Lucia.
Thank you, Adeline, and thank you all for being with us today night. And thanks to the summit team for the super work they're doing. Now, after watching Gentleman Jack in 2019, I started studying Anne Lister. And I can say that later on, she really helped me navigate through the first lockdown. I started writing about Anne to tackle the Italian Wikipedia page, but during the following summer, I prepared my very first project related to Anne. That was a Venice travel companion in the footsteps of Anne Lister. This is when I met Adeline online, as you said. She had just published the Venice travel map on Packed with Potential, and she immediately answered my open call for help on Facebook. She sent me her Venice transcript, and we didn't know each other before, so it was actually my very first contact with the Anne Lister verse, and I was amazed by her generosity in sharing her hard work of transcriber of Codebreaker with a total stranger. But right before going online with the website, I met Francesca Raya through her Instagram account, Gentleman Jack the Lass, where she still today posts the daily entries from Anne's journals that she transcribes. After some time, Irene Trotta joined us, so the team was complete with the other Italian codebreaker of the archive project. Irene completely revamped our website, and together we started the first common project. It was the Going to Italy project about Anne's 1827 journey. Today we are researching, writing, and walking in Anne Lister's footsteps, and not only hers, but also her friends and acquaintances in Italy or wherever we can. We'll have a session, as Janneke said, tomorrow about the Italian project, but here I am going to share some insight about what we have seen following Anne. Now, starting from Italy, of course, being so close and in good company, I visited Verona with Adeline. She already told you about our raid in town following Anne. It was really a blast. On my way back home from that journey, I made a little detour to see Palazzo Te, just outside Mantua. Anne appreciated the fresco by Giulio Romano there, and she also found a pavement that she thought would be lovely for Shibden Hall. Then there was Milan, of course, where we also had an Anne Lister Italia meet earlier this year in February. Anne's favorite paintings are still hanging on display at the Brera Gallery today. I have to say that for almost every place, we found exactly what Anne described in her travel journal. And in some places, we knew even more than the staff did. Then in my travel, there's Venice, of course. As I said, the travel companion to Venice has been my very first project related to Anne Lister. Maybe this is the city that mostly remained as she saw it. I know the town quite well, and going there after discovering Anne, it was amazing for me. After nearly 50 years, I have a new perspective on so many places I was already familiar with. And Anne's descriptions add a very interesting and unique layer to what I and maybe we already know. I was delighted when I realized my usual walk there is the same Anne used to do. Not far from Venice, then, we have Padua. We celebrated their Anne Lister's birthday in 2021 with some of our followers, now friends. This is another city where Anne helped me discover new things, or where I had a good laugh about her, we can say. This sometimes happens. The Scrovegni Chapel, for example, it's entirely painted by Giotto, the master of masters at the beginning of the 14th century. Interesting enough, this masterpiece was listed by UNESCO only in 2021, so 10 years after they listed Anne Lister's journals. Anyway, Anne couldn't remember the name of the painter, but noted him as a goodish one. Thank you, Anne. This led me to a thought about Anne's travel notes. Who knows what the conditions of those paintings in those days were, with humidity and being the church always open. Also, it seems that Anne's sight wasn't that good. So I often wonder what she did actually see of that masterpiece and of so many other places. But besides Italy, I also followed Anne abroad, like in Holland. I am Italian, but I am also Dutch, like Janneke. So when I learned that Anne had been to Holland in 1831 with Mariana Lawton, I started matching my family gatherings to see what Anne Lister related places I could find. I started from Leiden. She saw and wrote about many things there, like the St. Peter's Kerk with the Urn of Boerhaave, which she described in detail with the caption. I was also lucky enough to have a quick look in the Hoge Kerk, the High Church as I'm called it, which nowadays is only open for private events. So I was very lucky there. Then we have some of my favorite places in Denmark and Copenhagen, where we obviously alight at the Hotel Royal. It's the hotel where Anne stayed in 1833 and 39. It's right in front of the Christiansborg Castle, which Anne used to call Frederiksborg. She messed the name quite often here. In 2021, I was there on the exact anniversary of Anne's 1833 arrival in town on the 18th of September. So
You're muted, Lucia.
have I been muted all the way around?
No, just one.
Oh,
just one.
sorry. So now in 2021, I was there on the exact anniversary of Anne's 1833 arrival in town on the 18th of September. So I went there with a special book, which you may know. It's Adeline's first book about her journey to Copenhagen. The building today is an institutional seat, but that wasn't enough to stop me. Now, somehow I have a reputation in the Lister community for my persuasion abilities. Believe me, I just ask and then things happen. And most of the time, some doors open. So this time I saw a doorbell and tried to see if anybody would answer. They did. And I did my usual Lister TED talk. So they allowed me into the only room left as in the 19th century. You can see it in the central pic here. They also showed me some prints of the previous layout of the building. And all in all, I must say, really friendly people, the Danes. Now, this is the Voorvoelkerke, the Notre Dame, and visited it twice, first in 1833 and then with Anne Walker in 1839. In 33, she even had a conversation at court about it with Princess Caroline Amalia. The first statues placed here were plasters modeled by Bertel Thorvaldsen and his Italian assistant like Pietro Tenerani for the Christ, Luigi Biename, Carlesi, and others. Later, these statues were replaced by the marble ones coming from Carrara in Italy. The marble Christ statue we see today arrived from Carrara in the very same days of late September 1833, when Anne arrived there. And it's still unclear if this one is the statue she saw in that year, or if it was the model. Either way, while in Copenhagen, we are still able to see exactly the pieces that she saw, since the Christ model is now on display at the Thorvaldsen Museum together with the Apostles' models. And Anne certainly saw the marble ones in this church in 1839. And talking about statues, we reach Rosenborg, one of the many royal castles in Copenhagen. Its gardens are really lovely, and there are several bronze statues. Anne was particularly impressed by this one, a lion assaulting a horse. I admit it is a matter of personal taste, but like in this case, I sat in front of it, wondering why she was so impressed, as there are so many other beautiful statues there. This led me to another observation about Anne's notes. Other than her personal taste, she was often very fast in and out in places. And we know it from the timings she noted on the diaries. So if it's on one hand admirable how much she was anyway able to take in so briefly, on the other hand, she also relied on her good guidebooks or on what her Laquis de Place would tell her before or after her visit. Still, I found this statue quite unsettling, and maybe Anne too, and that's why she wrote about it on October 14, so yesterday in 1833. Anyway, there are many other interesting castles in Denmark for Anne Lister's enthusiasts, like Kronborg in Helsingør. Besides being a beautiful castle itself, this one is known as the castle of Shakespeare's Hamlet tragedy. Plenty of skulls everywhere, as you can imagine, and everybody is searching for Shakespeare's inspirations. I obviously enjoyed this part, but I wanted to see what Anne saw in 1839 with a walker there. After finding almost everything she described, I was only missing the platform roof from where she admired the Swedish coast. I kindly shared my disappointment with the staff, and they were kind enough to explain that the terrace was closed due to COVID restrictions. But at least I was allowed to quick peek to the 151 steps that Anne described. And beyond the castle itself, all the walk around Helsingør that Anne described is really worth it. The last place I want to share with you is the ancient capital of Denmark, Roskilde. In Roskilde Cathedral, Anne described especially two chapels. Nota bene, the whole church is scattered with coffins of royals, but Anne called only the White Chapel royal. In fact, today it is hosting the remains of King Frederick VI and Queen Marie-Sophie, who were on the throne when Anne was there in 1833, and whom she actually met at court in 1833. Some staff members were really glad to help me in tracking all that part of the royal family that she met. And it was when I explained them why I was using my special personal 19th century guidebook. Another interesting fact, it's exactly on these days, so the 15th of October in 1833, Anne wrote a letter to her aunt about her stay in Roskilde a few days before. In the end, I shared with Anne both the fate of being there for 2 days and the satisfaction with the cathedral, but I got the right end of the stick with the kindness I met, while Anne's host there, Madame Rosenkrantz, seemed quite cold with her. So these were some examples of how I traveled in Anne's footsteps. And of course, everyone had their own way of doing it and experiencing it. But I think we all share the same fun and curiosity. So these tips basically sum up my fundamentals to prepare and enjoy my travels in Anne Lister's footsteps. Prepare the itineraries and possibly mix Anne with other things so that your friends will not get the feeling of being tricked in her footsteps, which they will. Once you're back home, save your pictures and write your impressions as soon as possible. Get some really pair of really good shoes, because you'll be walking a lot, and create new memories with your friends so that they get to love and Lister too, if they don't already. And remember what Anne wrote in 1833, I am thankful enough for all the blessing I enjoy. Traveling itself is something we've learned not to give for granted and to be thankful for. Despite not being a religious person, I've learned, I have a deep belief in gratitude. It has the greatest power to spark positive chains of events. So wherever I go following Anne, there is always a place of worship where I can light a candle to thank her and some other good friends of hers and of us by now. So thank you all. If you want to know more about my sauntering in Anne's footsteps and share my joy when I find, say, a tree she described like this one in Padua, you'll find everything on the Anne Lister Italia website, Instagram, and Twitter. And now the words goes to Susanne Piotrowski. Susanne will help you to discover other Lister's destination. Follow her very carefully, because amongst the many places, she's been to Paris with Anne.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Good morning, good evening, good middle of the night to all of you. And thanks to the Summit Squad of letting us do this session at this crazy time. When I saw Gentleman Jack, I started to find out if people were working on the diaries. So I learned about the transcription project, applied, and was very happy when I was accepted. And it started very early that I wanted to see places Anne Lister had been when I became a code breaker, especially after the creating of travel maps with Janneke. So in 2021, when I was thinking about doing something on the 30th return of my mother's death, something just the two of us had done, I thought of Paris, the Louvre, and if in Paris, walking in Anne Lister's footsteps. It was mainly things I read about in one of my batches for the transcription project and in Helena Whitbread's No Priest But Love. When I came back, I felt the energy it had given me, and I started to think about transcribing and decoding every entry she made in Paris. So transcribing, searching for streets, buildings, building numbers, looking for old pictures, reading about Paris, and especially about the transformation in the 1850s done by Haussmann. And then going back to Paris and walk and walk and walk with Anne. In this session, I would like to talk about the process of footstepping. If you'd like to hear more about the results for Paris, you should get off to Paris with me later this day. The process started with transcribing the entries for 1,394 days, which means 1,120 diary pages. That took nearly a year. It meant taking notes of every address, street, and building she mentioned. The first two notebooks are the result of this. The third is my book of itineraries for every day of my times in Paris. Then I compared street maps. The back and one is from 1837. I also used maps of 1840 and 1889. The one below is a modern one. Especially the changes in the 1950s done by Haussmann remodeled the look and many streets. One of the most interesting parts was to use travel guides of Anne's time. The left one is Galignani's new travel guide of Paris. This one is from 1837 and bought several editions. And this 1837 edition was found in her little apartment after her death. And I'm very proud to have the same edition. She used many of Galignani's travel guides for her journeys to Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and in France. And then walking. To now, 160 kilometers in Paris, maybe 60 in around Aachen, not so many in Bremen. But all these towns have good public transport services. So if you want to see those places, you can jump on the metro or a bus or a tram. Research in Germany, of course, is easier for me. Bremen, I know by heart. It's the town I was born and spent the first 20 years of my life. I know the museums, archives, places. And I visited Aachen so many times before I knew Anne Lister, because I love the cathedral. Where to see the results of my journeys at the moment? Everything about Paris on Instagram, parts on Twitter and Facebook as well. And like Janneke said, maybe Paris will be a book someday, or maybe I'm going to make a blog out of it. You can find a travel map about Aachen from Janneke and me on Packed with Potential, and there will be a walking tour. But the best result was a weekend with the codebreakers Janneke, Kerstin and Petra when we walked through Aachen together and had lots of fun. Bremen transforms into a walking tour at the moment, and maybe I'm thinking about next stop, Brussels. Now, at the end, I want to show how troublesome it can be to get from a diary entry to the place in real life. One example from Aachen. Anne wrote on the 12th of September 1829, drove to Chevier's Rue de Cheminée to ask to see the pin manufactory to be shown. Impossible. But talked the woman partly over. It's a bit like Lucia. So there were 22 pin manufactories in Aachen at that time. Aachen was famous for these factories. The name Chevier is totally unknown in Aachen. Rue de Cheminée is a wrong translation into French. It would mean Schornsteinstraße, Chimney Street. There never was or is a street of that name in Aachen. So I give up. You can't always be lucky to understand Anne Lister. But then I remembered that she sometimes wrote names like she had heard them. And I tried to speak the name in a German manner. Chevier, a name that is very well known in Aachen. And so I was able to find the street, Elfschornsteinstraße. So Anne not only ignored the first part of the street name and only translated the Schornstein part, but ignored that as an Elfschornstein definitely is something different from a chimney. And then I knew that she meant a street I walked nearly every time I was in Aachen. And the result is Chevier's Nadelfabrik, Pin Manufactory, Aachen, Elfschornsteinstraße. Here you can see the entrance gate where Anne tried to persuade the woman to let her in. So thank you very much for listening. The building behind me on this picture is my beloved Quai Voltaire number 15, where Mariana Barlow and Anne Lister lived in 1825. And if you like to hear the latest news about it, you should join the Off to Paris session later this day. And now I'm hand over again to our wonderful facilitator, Janneke, for the Q&A part.
Wow. Now, thank you very much, everybody, for this beautiful presentation of everything that you went through and that you noticed and that you saw, and how, and all the tips and tricks that you shared with us. Now, I'm opening up the questions for the audience, and I see that there have been some questions already. So let me just dive straight in. The first question that came through to us is, where do you wish Anne had traveled to? Is there a place that you would want her to have reviewed for you? Adeline?
I wish Anne managed to climb up Cape Idris. She had to turn back because of bad weather, and I climbed it for her, I think, earlier this year. I wish she went up, because I would have loved to hear what she thought about it. And what was that other mountain? Was it Gusta in Norway? She wanted to do that too, and she couldn't. And that would have been very interesting. I would have loved to hear what she said, because I think in the end she wrote that it was probably not worth the time, because it only goats attempted, because it was so rocky. But I went up that as well, and it wasn't easy, but I did it for her. So if she had done those, I bet you there'll be pages of it. She would have written a lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And Lucia, what about places maybe in Italy that she never got to see?
Yeah, I think I would have loved her reading what she wrote, what she thought about Florence, because the very heart of the town by then was quite small and but packed with history and beautiful things. So I would be very curious to see her there. But
And it's actually quite interesting because Florence now in our time is definitely one of those ones up there with Venice and Milan that people would go and see, and Rome, of course. Is there any, do you know of any reason why she never made it there? Did she mention it as wanting to go?
She wanted to go to travel more extensively to Italy, but
Just didn't live long enough.
She did, yeah, unfortunately. And but she toured, the tour she did in Italy lasted over 40 days, about 40 days, and she remained in the north part, but we'll talk about it more extensively tomorrow
In the next section.
in the next section.
And how about Susanne? Is there anywhere in Germany that you might have, or indeed in anywhere else in Europe that you would have been interested to hear about?
Yeah, there are some very pretty places in Bremen. I would love to hear what she was thinking about that. There is a pretty little street. It's called the Schnorr. I don't know if Adeline knows it. And it has a very lovely medieval touch, and it's nearby the hotel where Anne stayed. But the places she described in Bremen are all in a very small area. She doesn't seem to walk very far from the hotel, and there she could see the cathedral and the town hall and the marketplace. But that's a place she didn't mention. And another thing in Aachen is the pointy thing, as you might remember, Janneke.
I do.
Very big. I don't know what should I say. It's for geographical measurement. She definitely must have seen, and she didn't mention it, but Kerstin did a wonderful drawing, and so now are we referring to it as the pointy thing that Anne Lister saw but never mentioned.
And it's so in your face. I mean, and it was there. We know it was there when she visited. Yeah, so it's remarkable that she didn't remark on it at all. Yep. What I found was interesting in reading her travel notes for the Netherlands, for example, is when you mentioned, Susanne, the Galliani the guidebook. She definitely does visit places that are in a guidebook, which not necessarily are now places that people would go as a tourist. So there's this little place in the Netherlands called Broek in Waterland, which is just a little place, and it is very pretty, but no one these days would go there as a tourist attraction. And she went there because it was in that book, I imagine. So that's quite odd. And if I may answer part of the question as well, it's not so much that I wished that Anne had traveled more in the Netherlands necessarily. I mean, obviously that'd be lovely. And it, be nice if she'd been to my town, for example, but, she never went. And I don't blame her particularly. But what I regret is that she never did the full transcript in her diary. So she kept the notes for the Netherlands, but she never actually wrote. So there's 10 blank pages in her actual journal for that. And I'm sure that she would have had a lot more to say in there than just the notes that she took. But hey, what can we do? There's a question here for you, Adeline. Did you somehow feel that Anne was near you when you were climbing the mountains and being in the places she's been?
Yes, definitely. But you know what? I felt closest to her when I did any of my travels when I was alone, and I actually really recommend it, that go alone, because then you're really immersed in it, and it's as though you're traveling with her spirit. And then when you're climbing up a mountain and you're tired, or the altitude is messing with your head, or you haven't eaten breakfast, because I don't normally eat breakfast. I steal eggs from the breakfast buffet.
You're a bit like Anne then, not having breakfast.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because when early in the morning, I can't talk, I can't eat. Like I can walk, but anything else I can't do. So like when I was in Switzerland and we were going up all these mountains, I had a tendency to talk with who I was with, but I've noticed that when I traveled on my own, all I could think of was how Anne felt. You could feel every stone, every rock. You can feel the ache in your quads or your glutes or whatever it is, and then when the sweat's coming down, and you're wearing wicking clothes now. Your clothes are light and all that, but she would be in wool, and so you keep thinking about the situation you're in, and you compare it to what might have been for her. And yeah, you feel closer to her for sure, definitely. And even when you're climbing mountains that she hasn't climbed before, like that she wanted to climb, like Cader Idris, you actually even feel that connection because you're doing it for her, and you're doing it using a trail that she would have done. And that's why Puy de Dôme as well was really very special, because there's a couple of ways that you can go up, of course, but the trail that I followed was the mule trail that she went up. So that was and that was steep. That was really, really steep. It's amazing that she could do it in normal boots, all her clothing. She didn't have a dry thread on her, she said, when she got up there. I mean, I was the same. I mean, it was raining, yes, but I was also sweating, even though it was so cold. I had 3 layers on, but it was still cold and
all the
tough.
skirts and all the layers and all that. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Going up there, petticoats and stuff.
Yeah. But Susanne, how about walking around Paris? And because Paris was really her home away from home for quite a while, did it make you feel like you were treading like or being in her environment where she was at home? How does it compare to Halifax, for example?
Oof, wow. Just start to say Halifax is this week and Paris is this week. Yes, there are places where I felt very much like I've been in her time. It's so much walking to do other than in Halifax, and it's funny to walk or really to walk these paths and not to take the metro or a bus or something, because
to really and experience what she experienced.
Yeah, and to see how nerdy it was sometimes. You will hear about something about the walking routines she had later at the After Paris session. She walked and walked and walked for exercise, for good heaven knows what. And when you try to walk all the walks, and like Adeline, keeping an eye on your watch to see how long it would take me to get from place A to place B. So I'm really impressed at times what she did in a day, and yes, but Paris is definitely something completely different because she lived there, and it's not about a travel. It's about settles up. Home.
Yeah. And that's an interesting difference that you're noting there. That really it was her home, away from home, and she wasn't conquering mountains as such. Which is so there's those are two different aspects of her.
She was
being
conquering.
abroad.
She was conquering the column at Place Vendôme, but that's not as high as the Puy de Dôme or anything.
Did she go
else.
up it? Yeah, I've not read that. Yeah. Oh yeah, funny. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think, I mean, we are heading for sort of towards the end of this session, but I think I would like to give each of you still one more chance is the wrong word, but one more opportunity to maybe share with us what exactly it is that traveling in her footsteps has given to you. Lucia, what has it given you?
Well, maybe I didn't used to enjoy that much being alone, traveling alone, and this wandering. I was with Anne, actually. I felt like I was with her, but yeah, a bit of more self-confidence in traveling, and the curiosity. And she hinted me in going beyond what I would normally be looking for, just to step a little further and dare asking, for example, because I always ask if I don't find or see something.
So what do you tell people when you ring their bell and say, hey, in the 19th century, there was a woman who visited and I would like to see the room? Is that
exactly this?
Okay.
Exactly this.
Right.
I just briefly explain that I am following a 19th century guidebook, which is a journal written by a person who actually traveled there. And most of the times they get really intrigued by the story. And since I always keep the transcriptions on my tablet and I always have it with me, I show them. And that's it. They just get with me on board and show me. People are really willful. They want to help. They're glad to help. So yeah. If you ask, most of the times you will find someone.
So if there's anything we can take away from this, and listen at home, really be brave like Lucia, and brave like obviously all these women, but Lucia is definitely one who we know has always enthused us to do the same. Remember, Susanne, when you were literally in Paris and you were sharing with us, I'm standing outside this door.
Yeah.
Can
and
I ring the bell?
Lucia bullying me to press the button.
Press the button.
And I was there for this bloody intercom and had no idea how it works. And Lucia said, do it, just do it. And yes, that's something I learned from Lucia to bring the door.
And actually, and to make that circle come around, it really is what Anne did herself. I mean, she is just known, you can tell in all her descriptions in her journals that she always asked everybody everything. She wanted to know, she wanted to see. I remember reading in like one of the indexes or in one of the notes about her finances in Sweden that she writes down, I paid 6 krona or whatever to see pancakes being made in the kitchen. She wanted to know how the blinking pancakes were made in the kitchen, what ingredients people use. She wanted to know everything, and that's definitely something I think.
She wanted to know how a treadmill worked, so yes. And she did it herself. That's incredible.
Yeah, definitely
it's a bit
true.
Like it's a bit like reading something written nearly 200 years ago. We might be dismissing it a bit, like we already know this stuff, but it's not like that with Anne, because every time she manages to surprise us. Somehow.
Yeah. Now I was told, maybe as a lot, because I was told before that because there's no session after this, I think I can just risk one more question. I think people haven't really got anywhere to go necessarily right now. So really, maybe just as a last final bang, is there anything that you can share with us where Anne described something in a journal and you noticed it was still there? And what were your most amazing finds? Adeline?
Actually, she didn't write this in her journal, but she wrote it in a letter to her aunt. So in her journal, she described an obelisk or a cenotaph of some sort of an eagle with no head when she crossed the border from Luxembourg into Trier. This was in 1833, Susanna. And it was a town that she didn't even write what the name was. And so when I transcribed 1833, I just, where in the world is that? I was looking at Google Maps. I said, where would there be an old customs, like a toll ground? Because there were so many customs stops in Germany at the time. So finally, one day I managed to kind of work it out. So if she traveled this way, she would have had to go through this little town in Germany called Eagle. I said, this is probably where it is. And it's just one street through the whole stupid town. And then when you put yourself on Google Maps in Germany, sometimes even when you have the street view, because of all the privacy laws in Germany, you can't see the street. Everything's all blurred out. So luckily I lived in Bonn. I went there anyway. And there was that old monument that she described, that with the eagle with no head. And it was basically an old funerary monument of one of the rich cloth merchants who lived there. And she thought it was quite unique. If I had driven through that road, I'll go, oh, okay, broken monument, that's about it. You wouldn't think of it, And then there was another monument that she mentioned in her diary, which was a big block of rock in Koblenz. And it was during the wars when the Russians were coming in, and then the French were fighting and all that kind of stuff. And I think the Russians came and they claimed Koblenz as theirs. And when the French came or the Germans came, they turned them back. But they were so confident of their win that they had already built a monument and wrote that we came to Koblenz and we conquered. And then the other group, I think it was the French, put in the monument itself. That's what they thought. and Anne wrote that in her diary. So I went looking for that as well. It's behind a church by the road. No one really cares about it. It's just there. It's all moldy. It's all black from the centuries of dirt, and no one really gives a shit, So it's when you find something like this, something that normally wouldn't matter anymore, suddenly matters. And there's humor in it because she takes time to write these things, and she makes you try and understand what these things are.
Yeah. Wow. Now, how to go over that? Susanne or Lucia, have you anything to share about something marvelous that you found that she also saw?
Lucia, or you?
You do.
Okay. Well, at Paris, of course, there are many things you can still see, but my best experience was when I was preparing for a trip to Paris. I was on Google Street Map and I walked along the Rue de Rivoli. Just to, I don't know, I can't even remember what I was looking for. And then there are arcades and you can see shop names a little bit in between. And that was the point where I nearly fainted because I saw the name Galignani. And as I told before, she used their travel maps. They had a daily messenger for English people in Paris about advertisements, but also information about English and French politics. And she really often went in there to buy books. It isn't at the same place where it was when Anne bought her books. It was then in Rue Vivienne, and they moved later to Rue de Rivoli, but it's still the same bookshop. And so of course I was absolutely struck to see that it's still there. And of course the next trip to Paris started with going to Galignani's and buy a book, of course.
Yeah. Great. Lucia, I think everything she saw in Italy was wonderful, I imagine.
Yeah, well, basically, for example, in Venice, everything is nearly the same, as I said. But I was particularly struck by when I realized that she visited the Cappella degli Scrovegni I talked about earlier on, because she doesn't name it. She just did a little chapel at the end of the Roman amphitheater remains. So it took me a while to map the town and locate it, and I said, but that's the Scrovegni chapel. So I was amazed by how, I mean, she nearly dismissed it by saying that the painter was a goodish one, but today there's people coming from all over the world and waiting in queue for hours just to spend 20 minutes in that place. And another thing is I may be sappy in this, but I'm fond of trees. Anne describes trees and plants wherever she goes.
Oh, vegetation as well.
I,
What sort of crops
yeah,
there are? Always,
I
yeah.
managed. I very much, when I
Ooh.
those very same big magnolia tree and the Bignonia catalpa, and another one in Leiden in the Hortus Botanicus, of course, again, and they are living beings. That's what really made me a bit emotional in this sense, because it's like life going on from Anne to me.
Yeah,
So
I can
standing
imagine.
next to these trees was
These
quite
live
a
beings.
moment.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. Well, I mean, thank you so much for this session, everybody. It's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it. I hope the people at home have as well. I do see lots of thanks in our chat. And I'm confident that we probably at this point have, well, confident, possibly the lowest number of people in our session, but we will be on catch up later, and the squad will share the recordings. Anyway, we can see that for as long as we want. I want to thank you again, and I'm hoping to see you all in future sessions today and tomorrow. We've got most of the weekend still to come, and I'm excited about it. So see you there. Bye.
Bye.